Blessed coffee. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the show. Today we're taking a look at a 2012 animated feature, War of the Worlds Goliath. As you can imagine from the title, this is directly related to H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. That one came out in 1895, serialized between then and 1897 before it got a book, and the book was released in full the year after that. This story, H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, is one of the most important and influential science fiction stories of all time, to the point where even if you've never read any science fiction, you've heard of this story. You know its concept. You know what a tripod is. And yeah, not just, and its importance isn't just really relegated just to general science fiction or even just alien invasion stories. If you're a mech fan, if you're a Battletech fan or a fan of Heavy Gear, Gundam, Votoms, Muv-Luv, I don't give a fuck. If you're a person who enjoys that particular subgenre of science fiction, you owe this story a serious debt of gratitude. Because think about it. If you're thinking of a piloted, walking, robotic war machine, how far back do you go before you find the first one? You go back to the War of the Worlds. The Martian Tripods are the earliest example of this concept in science fiction. There were a couple of other things, like Jules Verne did a story with a steam-powered automaton elephant in one of his stories. But obviously that's, that's like a prototype for the main event here. If we're talking battle mechs, this is the ancestor to all of that stuff. So yeah, kudos to Mr. Wells. And also for Battletech and related tabletop mecha enthusiasts, we also owe a double thank you to him because he was one of the earliest proponents of commercial wargaming as well. So, extra kudos to Mr. Wells for that. So as you can imagine, for a story this important, it's had a number of adaptations over the years. I mean, obviously the Orson Welles radio show that scared the fuck out of everybody when that came out. That was fun. Also in movies, there's the 53 one, the Spielberg one, and there's been a number of... there's even a prog rock opera by a guy named Jeff Wayne. That one's actually pretty good. Let's give it a listen if you're into the prog rock kind of thing. But there's also a number of sequels, as you can imagine. Most of them in the literary form, but this one was a Malaysian-produced animated film directed by a guy named Joe Pearson, who's had a number of credits, both in the art department and in the production capacity in the animation world. This one takes place 15 years after the end of the initial story. The Martians have, of course, got a nasty case of the flu after killing 140 million people worldwide in this version of the story. Yeah, the invasion was nasty. The world has, rebuilt since then using the Martian technology that they managed to recover and reverse engineer. They formed an organization to do that called the Allied Resistance Earth Squadrons, or ARES, which, considering that the main enemy is from Mars, is, apt. They've rebuilt the cities, rebuilt our monuments, rebuilt our world using this technology, and really upgraded everything in many ways. You'll see when we get to what I like about this movie in terms of its look and stuff. This has very much become a dieselpunk kind of aesthetic, and especially when you look at what we did with in terms of military technologies. We've designed our own basically three-legged mechs equipped with everything from artillery cannons, machine guns, rockets, and our own version of the Martian heat rays. And these things look pretty cool. The design on these things is incredible, as I get into just the amount of detail and work that went into these. Now, of course, humans being humans, after a decade and a half of not hearing anything from the Martians, well, we've kind of reverted back to our own ways. And, well, it's 1914. Take a guess what happens in Sarajevo that year. Yeah, World War I's about to start. More things change, more things stay the same. And I have to admit, there's a version of this movie where the Martians don't launch a second invasion that would actually be really fucking cool. Like the idea of World War I, but with, Martian technology-derived tripod mechs with heat rays and all sorts of stuff, bring in their own version of the black for the Martians using the original story as chemical weapons. I mean, there is a version of World War I that could be written based on a post-War of the Worlds scenario that I think would be really, really interesting to explore. As it is, though, the Martians do launch a second invasion, so it's up to Ares, and more specifically, as the main focus of the movie, the crew of one of these newest versions of these heavy tripods, named the Goliath, as obviously it's a titular mech, being led by Captain Eric Wells and his crew, who have to take on the Martians wherever they attack and to defend the world against, the extinction of the human race, essentially. So this is very much, if the original story by H.G. Wells is Alien, this one is Aliens. This time it's war. We actually stand a fighting chance against the Martians, although it ain't going to be easy because A, they've taken their shots, so our local microbes aren't going to be anywhere near as effective. And they've also upgraded their tech. We see, like, in the original prologue, when we follow us young Eric Wells as he watches his parents get just obliterated by a Martian tripod, where we see the original version of the tripod, and it actually does match the descriptions from the original story very well. And then you see the new ones show up, and they're, like, even worse, nastier, more, freaky looking, and with, much more powerful weapons and armor. But, the real stars of the show, I think, are, as I mentioned, the mechs on the human side. The amount of just detail that goes into these, and I love the fact that these are actually, like, crude. These, obviously, tanks were a creation of World War I, so they're not going to be around for this one. But these things pretty much take the place of that. The actual, Goliath and all the other, mechs of the same size have a full crew to them. You have gunners. You have Eric Wells, Captain Wells at the top of it, pointing out targets and, dictating, coordinating with the other, members of the crew and other members of, near-eye squads. And then you have the other members of the crew. You have the engineer in the down there, just making sure everything's working properly, ensuring the heat ray gets charged up so it can fire. The loading mechanism on the main artillery and everything. It's just incredibly well detailed. The animation on these things. The film is a combination of both 2D and CGI. CGI specifically for the mechs and vehicles and such as that. We have things like the Ares' biplane contingent, which are basically World War I era biplanes with like scramjet afterburners and stuff like that, with the obviously the technological upgrades required to keep them from falling apart when they're going that fast. One of them piloted by a guy named Manfred von Richthofen, who real world World War I buffs will know as the Red fucking Baron. Yeah, one of the great things about this, oftentimes when we look at mechs in media, it's always the future, right? Near future, far future, whatever. Here it's a dieselpunk alt history kind of thing, so we can bring in those real world people and just put them in these situations and just go to town with them. Like Ares' head of science, Nikola Tesla. I guess Edison. No mention of Edison. He probably got wasted during the invasion. But yeah, Nikola Tesla is their head of science, one of the guys responsible for reverse engineering all this stuff. Manfred von Richthofen, the Red Baron, is an ace pilot in Ares' air squadrons. And yeah, one of the guys who founded this whole organization, Teddy fucking Roosevelt, ex-U.S. president, current Secretary of War, and in real life one of the most interesting people to ever hold that office, because the guy got shot during a speech and then just kept going. The guy's biography reads like fiction, but it's real. I mean, just like, if you ever wanted to watch a movie where Teddy Roosevelt picks up a machine gun and starts shooting at flying saucers, this is your movie. This movie was made for you. I mean, it's honestly cool. Not to mention the fact that the guy's played by James Byrne, who's great in the role. Funny thing, one of the co-writer on this movie was a guy named David Abramowitz. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Abramowitz, who was also a writer on Highlander: The Search for Vengeance, of which Joe Pearson, the director of this, was a co-producer. He was also one of the writers on Highlander the series, of which 4 cast members for this movie were regulars on. You have Peter Wingfield playing Captain Eric Wells, Adrian Paul, the lead of Highlander the series, playing Corporal Patrick O'Brien, Elizabeth Grayson is Lieutenant Jennifer Carter, and James Byrne is, of course, playing Teddy Roosevelt. You also have additional voices. You got Bo Billingsley, Jet Black from Cowboy Bebop. He's playing Sergeant Abraham Douglas, Canadian. represent the character, I mean. And of course, you've got, also Adam Baldwin has a part in this. You got Mark Shepard, also a small part. This is a good cast. It's just like, okay, this is a fun little, this movie is definitely popular at Highlander for Highlander fans too, I think. And the cast works very well. I will say, coming down to, frankly, I think it's mostly due to a question of the fact that this is a feature film rather than a series, OVA or whatever, is that the characters are fairly archetypal. There's not all that much time for them to be very developed. I think the one that gets the most development is probably Corporal Patrick O'Brien, played by Adrian Paul, simply because he has the most conflict in his backstory. His brother is in the IRA, and he's technically in Ares to try and smuggle out heat rays for the IRA to fight the British with. But of course, he's feeling a bit conflicted, more than a little bit conflicted about the whole thing. So, so he has a little bit of that. But obviously, with the pace of the film, it's, what is it, about an hour, 28 minutes, about 86 minutes total. So yeah, there isn't necessarily a lot of time to really go into, deep character studies. So don't go in expecting that. This is very much an action movie kind of. I've had someone describe this as a very violent Saturday morning cartoon, which I could see that, and I don't mean that as a negative. That was, one negative review of the movie from way back when it was released in 2012. But that person's an idiot, because, if this had come out as a Saturday morning cartoon, I would have watched this religiously. Not to mention the fact that Joe Pearson is one of the director of this, worked in a number of those, including one that I really, really liked, Roswell Conspiracies. That one was way ahead of its time. Similar art style to this one, actually, in many ways. And it was around this time, actually, that the concept of this movie first came up, that we first started, thinking about this back in 97. And it was going to be an actual cartoon series. And it took a while to get funding, and eventually they did through the Malaysian co-production, and that's how we ended up with the feature film. Originally, this was going to be a R-rated, violent, bloody kind of war story, and there was, actually a tie-in with Heavy Metal magazine, probably due to the fact that Kevin Eastman, the editor-in-chief of there, is also a co-producer on this movie. And there was actually a full summer issue with nothing but stories relating to the universe of War of the Worlds Goliath. It's well worth checking out. I like it quite a bit. Lots of good stuff in there, including things that was originally going to be a prologue taking place in around St. Petersburg, where you had, during the initial invasion, where you had one of the main characters was a general in Ares, back then a colonel, who was leading a charge of the Cossacks against Martian Tripods in the middle of winter in defense of St. Petersburg. That's just like, yeah, that was a pretty badass kind of thing right there. Of course, things being what they were, the rating was dropped to PG-13, and some cuts were made for both length and content in order to get a wider release for it, which didn't necessarily work out. I think there were some distribution issues. I will say, you don't really feel it too much. I think there's only one scene where I really noticed the cut from R to PG-13, and that was when Teddy Roosevelt his position's getting strafed by Martians during the final battle in Manhattan. And you see him get, splattered with blood. And it's a very close up. You don't really see what happened very much. And he's like, oh, no, my friend. In the full, view of it, yeah, someone got blown in half by the explosion. And that's about the only time I think you could really notice. The main cuts were a bit of as I mentioned, the aforementioned intro. There was supposed to be an extended battle in the canyons of New Mexico near Albuquerque during the mid portion that was cut. And of course, there is at least one scene where Captain Wells and Lieutenant Carter made use of the Goliath's cockpit in a rather unorthodox fashion. Yeah, wouldn't have mind seeing that. Definitely, there was going to be a director's cut with everything put into it, but for whatever reason, either from low sales for the actual film or simply something went wrong with distribution. I haven't been able to quite figure out that part. Simply put, that never materialized. The novelization, however, written by a guy named David Abramowitz, does include all the stuff that was cut, plus some extra stuff, including adaptations of the stories from the aforementioned Heavy Metal magazine issue. So if you want to get the most complete version of it, definitely go check out the novelization. It's actually pretty good. As it is, the film itself, yes, it's PG-13, so you're not going to see too many people getting ripped apart by Martian tentacles and stuff like that. So yes, no blood or blonde sex scene for you. However, here's the thing about PG-13: you can kill a lot of people just so long as you're not showing too much red. Sorry. And as it turns out, Martian tripods come equipped with weapons that are completely bloodless. They just incinerate you as painfully as possible. So yeah, there are lots and lots of occasions where you're going to see some poor schmuck getting obliterated in what appears to be an exceptionally painful way. Yeah, there's some. It may not be bloody, but it is pretty graphic. I would not recommend this film for little kids, obviously. And of course, Martians don't bleed red. So there's more than one occasion where Martians just get completely demolished in a very, very nice way. There's one particular scene where one of the crew of the Goliath just goes to town on a Martian and stabs the ever-loving shit out of him, and it's just nasty. The guy played by Tony Usov is actually a Malaysian character, which makes sense since the movie was produced there. A guy named Raja Iskandar Shah. He's also one of my favorite characters in this because he's a very cool, collected kind of guy, but he's also got some good lines, and of course the aforementioned badass scene right there. The characters themselves, while they are fairly archetypal and don't necessarily have a lot of development, they're fun people to have around, And I do definitely think that this movie has a really good pace to it. It goes quickly. It doesn't waste your time or anything like that. It feels a bit like what happens when you have a long-running anime series and it gets condensed into a single movie. Oftentimes that can suck, but in this case, I think it still works out very well, but it does inform a bit of the pacing. It's got a very kind of episodic feel to it. You have the initial setup, just showing off the initial situation, then the war game that gets interrupted by the Martians outside New York, then finally the battles in the events as the Goliath crew are sent to New Mexico to deal with one of the Martian invasion points, and then finally moving back to Manhattan to deal with the full-scale invasion and destructions happening there. The movie has that kind of episodic feel to it, which I think would have also worked very well for a series. If ever they want to return to this, I would highly recommend going that. If they can get something on the scale and the budget of the Netflix Castlevania series and stuff like that, yeah, especially the first 2 seasons, yeah, that is the kind of thing that I think would most be appropriate for this kind of subject matter. If you want to go back for the R rating, of course, which I obviously would love to. And really, expand on the world and stuff and the characters. The world especially, because there's a lot of interesting stuff here. If you look at just the initial view of the skyline of New York, obviously it's been rebuilt, and you can see new monuments being built of humanity triumphing over the Martians. There's a statue of Marty, which is just a woman carrying a big ass machine gun. The Statue of Liberty has been rebuilt with a sword in hand instead of a torch. So but there's also the little things, like the architecture is far more 1930s than it is 1910s, implying that the advances in technology have also served to upgrade our ability to build structures. Our construction technologies have improved, in metallurgy and those kinds of things, and the general sense of it. In just for people who enjoy this kind of dieselpunk era kind of technology porn, this movie's got some good stuff for you. I mean, the main base for the mobile base is the Leviathan, a dreadnought class combat airship with its own launch pad for aircraft and a giant heat ray cannon that comes out of it during the final battle. That is some good stuff. The different kinds of mechs with the mech tripods that Ares uses, from the smallest scout ones, single man scout ones, to the big ass Achilles class like the Goliath. And you really get a feel of not just what these things are capable of, but how well they deal with the Martians. The Martians themselves, their tripods are fewer in number because obviously they don't have, the resources to send everything all at once down to Earth. You see that, they typically operate in groups of threes, and they also have, limited firepower. They only use the heat rays, for instance, but they're really powerful ones. In the novelizations mentioned that the current new versions of the heat rays the Martians are using go up to 3,000 degrees Celsius on impact. That is some nasty shit right there. They also have, like composite ceramic armor and stuff like that. So on the one hand, you have these really high-tech, sleek, super mobile, fast-moving, powerful Martian tripods versus these plodding, very kind of, not so much rickety, but very, how should I put this? Well, tank-like, obviously, mechs that basically only really managed to take on the Martian tripods when they're in number and just through sheer firepower, just overwhelming them with everything they got. Like, most of the times that is how they end up beating them, just, firing everything they've got and hoping that it's good enough to just, either take out the pilot from sheer violence of the hits, or just, cause a rupture in the nuclear reactor that these things use for power. And, occasionally one of them does blow up and it's a big ass boom, I'll tell you that much. I will say it's also a nice little touch here. Humanity's also been reverse engineering those said power plants. And one of the plot points is that the Martians have captured a power plant in New Mexico and are using it to build stuff. And because we're using versions of their technology for this stuff, they can just move right in and plug in and just, do whatever the hell they want without any trouble. So it's kind of like that two sides of the coin. We've rebuilt ourselves past the point where we would be in our own history thanks to their technology, but it's also left us partially vulnerable to the Martians themselves, since they can just move right in. So that's a nice little point. I would like to see something like that explored more. And of course, the Martians themselves are just as nasty as before, and just as enigmatic. You never get anything from their perspective, really. You get a couple of POV shots from their own tripods and vehicles as they're obliterating people and destroying stuff, but there's no moment of, like trying to get into their heads or trying, to see things from their perspective. These things are monsters. They are here to wreck our shit. This is very much, a humanity fuck yeah kind of movie. I mean, you get one scene where they still use human blood for nourishment. So you do have one scene where a Martian just, reaches in with its tentacle and just sucks someone dry for a snack. It's just, nasty as hell. As nasty as PG-13 can make it, obviously. Again, another reason to go back to R if we ever can. Yeah, I mean, favorite scenes like that. I mean, obviously, I mentioned the scene of Roger just wrecking that Martian hand to hand. All the battle scenes are really, really good. You get the intensity of the fight, just the chaos of it. I mean, there's a scene where Teddy Roosevelt picks up, a machine gun and starts gunning down Martian flying machines, which is just, awesome in its own right. And speaking of flying machines, Manfred von Richthofen, the Red Baron, who is has his own his own dedicated scene in around the midpoint where he's defending the Leviathan from incoming enemy fighters, and it's just fucking cool. It's like this guy's got some serious maverick energy. And the whole thing, the characters are fun to follow. They're not the most complicated, but they are fun, which is really the best you can ask for from this kind of film. War of the Worlds Goliath is one of those films where I wish had gotten a much better reception when it first released, much wider release. Not only because I'd like to see the director's cut, obviously, but also because I would love to see this kind of thing get a sequel, because obviously the war ain't over by the end of the movie. We still got some ways to go. I would love to see more of this world, more of the, how the rest of the world is dealing with the Martian invasions. Because it's mentioned that, Ares bases in other parts of the world are, having to deal with their own shit, while, the main base in Manhattan is under attack, and they're dealing with, the Martians, sending troops all over the continental U.S. and the rest of the world. But also, what happens afterwards? We're winning, but it's going to be a hell of a battle. It's mentioned, after almost every fight, the casualties that, humanity's taking, and they are pretty high. This is not going to be an easy fight, and I'd like to see it continue. I mean, It's like the end of Starship Troopers. The war ain't over. We still got a ways to go. I want to see, I want to see Earth taking the fight to Mars. Like, you put the shoe on the other foot. Let's show these, tentacled bastards what it means to really fuck around with the human race. Let's go full Helldivers 2 on those assholes. But as it is, what we have is a lean, mean action war movie sci-fi mech flick, which I recommend giving a shot. It can be a little bit hard to find. I haven't been able to find it on any of the streaming services I have access to. It was on Netflix for a good while. Some kind souls have put it on YouTube, so if you feel like watching it there, do. If not, well, you can get the DVDs and Blu-rays off Amazon if you want. I recommend checking this out. If you're a mech fan, if you're the kind of person who enjoys, the likes of Sky Captain of the World of Tomorrow and that kind of aesthetic, The Rocketeer and those kinds of movies, and you're also a mech fan, yeah, I recommend checking this one out. If you're a fan of The War of the Worlds, this one's also worth checking out. I really like how dedicated they were to really replicating the Martians. The Martians are like they were in that story, complete bastards. And if you're just in the mood for something that you don't really see that much of, this is not the kind of, story and the kind of world that you see too much of either in regular film or, in anime film. So, yeah. I'd highly recommend taking a look at The War of the Worlds, Goliath, directed by Joe Pearson. I have been Zero Sum, my fellow mech fans. Thank you for watching. Humanity, fuck yeah! Let's go get those bastards. I'll see you next time.